Welcome to Hye Roots, Descendants of Ararat. I am George Aghjayan, your host for this episode of the first series devoted to Armenian genealogy. With each new episode of Hye Roots, we will explore different resources that will aid those wishing to learn more about their Armenian family history. Today, I am joined by Ted Andreasian. Hi, Ted.
Hi, George.
Ted and Nuna is our phenomenal photographic team. One of their long-term projects, Stone and Candle, examines and documents Armenian monasteries. You can read more about this project at tedandnuna.com, but I just wanted to read a quote from their website here. Through this exhibit, you will immerse yourself in the remote landscapes and venerable remains of Armenian monasteries, now stripped of their original function. Armenian monasteries were more than places of worship. Over the centuries, they evolved into beacons of knowledge and enlightenment. Monks transformed into scholars, delving into philosophy, science, art, history, and music, turning many of these sites into esteemed centers of learning. Within their sacred confines, intellectual pursuits thrived beside the spiritual. How are you doing today, Ted?
I'm doing fine, George.
Can you tell us a bit about where you grew up, what you remember about your grandparents, their lives, and what question is foremost on your mind?
Well, I grew up on Long Island in New York, and for my grandparents, there was always a question of, you're asking where you're from, and as we grew up, we've learned that one grandfather was from Istanbul. One of my grandmothers came over from Smyrna. She was born here in the U.S. My other grandfather was an orphan from Urdu, and my other grandmother came from France, and we're not really sure, or I wasn't sure where in France she came from. And then we had cousins on my father's side, and that was more or less it.
Excellent. In the course of your work and project work and photographic work, were there other things that you learned about your family or hope to find out?
Yeah, there were a few things. We've been working the last year and a half or so in Eastern Turkey, photographing the monasteries there and some of the fortresses. And we got curious about Urdu. We were thinking we would go there, we would photograph whatever was left of there. And there was nothing that we discovered that we could go visit and photograph. So we ended up not going there, but I did check the HM Hye Roots site and the Ellis Island records, and there was a smattering of records that I found, but there really wasn't a whole lot. I was thinking I would like to dig more and then go visit some of the places that they came from, but we're always so busy, it's hard to do that kind of research.
As many know, I've made a number of trips to Western Armenia, to Turkey, over the years, and I think that's really the reason that Ted and I connected, was that shared interest in documenting what remains of our cultural sites in the historic lands of Armenia that are now part of Turkey. Let's take a look inside the vault. I find one type of document typically very useful for a number of reasons: the petition for naturalization in the United States. Of course, the important information on when and where a person was born is included, but I also particularly look for the date and location of marriage, if supplied, and the names, places, and dates of birth of any children. In addition, the date and location of entering the United States is included, and sometimes a certificate of arrival. Here, we see the Declaration of Intention, petition for naturalization, and certificate of arrival for George Aghjayan, Ted's maternal grandfather. George had not yet married nor had any children. He was stated to have been born in Constantinople on August 20th, 1892. He had arrived in the United States on the SS Ivernia on November 25th, 1912. My grandfather traveled on the same ship 6 months earlier, coincidentally. Ship manifests in 1912 are excellent resources. Even with the ship and date known, finding the manifest can be challenging, depending on how the name has been indexed. On Ancestry.com, it was indexed as MANSSG Aghjayan instead of Manug. On FamilySearch.org, the first name was indexed as Poroni. In this case, simply limiting the search to the last name Aghjayan yielded the desired results, but other times more sophisticated methods will be needed, including the use of an asterisk for a wildcard within the name, or even reversing the first and last names in the search. In other words, first name Aghjayan and last name Manug. It helps with very broad name searches to include other information to help limit the results to something manageable. For example, a 5 or 10 year range for the age of birth, or in this case, 1912 as the exact year of immigration. From the ship manifest, we learn that Manug's mother was named Peruz and that he was joining a brother named Gabriel in Rodman, New York. Besides Ancestry.com and FamilySearch.org, the single best source for transcribed records of Armenians who came to the United States and Canada is Mark Arslan's Armenian Immigration Project website. I expect we will have Mark on a future episode, but I do want to mention one of the reports I used most often, the combined report by standardized last name, all roles. This is a query of those with similar surnames across the entire database. First, we have to determine what standardized surname grouping Aghjayan is classified into. A search for the spellings Aghjayan, both with a KS or an X, yielded no results. But searching for the spelling in the ship manifest as Aghjayan, J-A-N instead of J-I-A-N, indicates it is grouped with Uxuzian. In this case, there was only one record for Manug, but in other cases, there may be more records linked together. I was able to track Manug's brother Gabriel, or Capriel, Aghjayan from his arrival in the United States in 1911. He served in the U.S. military toward the end of World War I and as a radio operator in the Merchant Marines for over 25 years. Manug's mother, Peruz, and sister Hermine also came to the United States, joining Manug and Gabriel in 1913. In all of the records related to this family, they are shown to have been from Constantinople. Gabriel appears to have been the oldest of the children. He was stated to have been born around 1889. As mentioned in a previous episode, there is a marriage register for the Armenian Apostolic Churches of Constantinople, or Istanbul today. A microfilm copy is held at the Family Search Library in Salt Lake City. It is ordered chronologically and has not been indexed, thus one has to search each marriage. Logically, it makes sense to start searching a year before the first child is born and work backwards from there. That is exactly what I did to locate the marriage of Manvel Aghjayan and Peruz Manugyan. But let's turn our attention to another part of Ted's family tree, his father's parents, Miran Andreasian and Eugenie Matikyan. Again, using the naturalization papers of Miran as a starting point, we see his certificate of arrival indicates he traveled in the Lusitania, arriving in the United States February 20th, 1915. This was the 199th transatlantic crossing for the Lusitania. It would only successfully complete 2 more. On the Lusitania's return to England on the round-trip journey following Miran's arrival, the ship was sunk by a German U-boat off the coast of Ireland. Of the 1,960 passengers and crew aboard the Lusitania at the time of the sinking, 1,197, or over 60%, lost their lives. His future wife, Eugenie Matikyan, had arrived in the United States with her parents in 1906. Her father, Zadik's naturalization papers indicated Eugenie had been born on March 24, 1900 in Paris. Interestingly, the 1910 United States Census includes information on the number of children a woman had given birth to and the number still alive. In the case of Eugenie's mother, Victoria, she had given birth to 2 children with only 1 still alive. Also, the census indicates that Zadik and Victoria had been married 10 years, it being the first marriage for both of them. From this information, I was able to locate the birth record for Eugenie and the birth and death records for her sister Armenohi. In addition, I was able to locate the marriage record for Zadik and Victoria. From these records, we learn ages, birthplaces, and parents' names. Now it is time to share with Ted what we have learned. Welcome back, Ted. We have quite a bit to share with you today. Let's start with your maternal grandfather, George Aghjayan. I am not sure if you are aware, but George was married before marrying your grandmother, George Aghjayan. I found this earlier marriage in the records of St. Illuminator's Armenian Church in 1921 in New York City. His wife, Susanna Aghjayan, would pass away 4 years later in 1925, and her probate records are available online. The key pieces of information for us today are that Manuk's father was named Manuel, and his mother was named Peruz Narlian. In addition, he was born around 1893 in Constantinople. Manuk's brother Gabriel, sister Hermine, and mother Peruz all made it to the United States. It can be presumed that his father Manuel had passed away prior to 1911. I was also able to locate the marriage record for Manuel and Peruz in Constantinople in 1888. From this record, we learn that Manuel's father was also named Capriel, and thus who Manuk's brother Gabriel was named for. Interestingly, Peruz's maiden name in this record was Manugyan. I would interpret this as her father was named Manuk Narlian. So both sons were named for their grandparents. Based on the ages, Manuel was born around 1853 in Makrikyul, and Peruz around 1863 in Karakyul. While I think even more can be learned with further research, let's move to your paternal grandparents. I again was able to locate their marriage in the records of St. Illuminator's Armenian Church in New York City. The marriage record reads, Miran Andreasian, son of Kevork Andreasian, and Baidzar Cheljian or Chichian, I wasn't able to read it clearly, 35 years old, born in Ordu, married Satanik Matikyan, daughter of Zadig Matikyan, and Victoria Yazidjian, age 21, born Paris, married on September 29, 1922. While Miran arrived in the United States in 1915, Satanik, who was known as Jenny or Eugenie, arrived in 1906 with her parents and maternal grandmother Alavni. I am not sure if you were aware, but Satanik had a sister Armenuhi who had died in infancy in Paris.
No, I didn't know that.
In France, I was able to locate Satanik's birth as well as the marriage of Zadig and Victoria. What we learn is that Zadig's surname was more appropriately Dermatikyan, indicating he had an ancestor that had been a priest. We also learned he was born in the village of Khatchkars in the region of Sepastia or Sivas. Zadig's father was named Bagdasar and his mother Hustiana or Gustiana. Victoria was born in Constantinople and her parents were Hovannes and Alavni. Again, there are many additional areas for fruitful research, but let me stop here for a second and see if you have thoughts about this information so far. It's going to go on, believe me, but there is maybe just thoughts about this. We were able to find the baptism and the marriage record of this family in Paris.
So we have none of that information. At least I have none of that information. I just knew that she was, excuse me, Eugenie Matikyan, and that was as far as I discovered.
So you know nothing about Zadig Matikyan?
About Zadig and nothing about Sepastia. We were there. We were photographing there.
So this village is east of Sepastia in the Khatchkars region or Hafik region. So it's part of those cluster of villages, Armenian villages in that area. Govdun, this is one of those regions, well-known. There are many Armenian villages in that region. Zadig actually is a very important person, and that's more of what I want to talk about is him. He was active in the Armenian Revolutionary Federation and involved in Operation Nemesis, the plan to exact justice against the criminals responsible for the Armenian genocide. There is a lengthy 3-page write-up on Zadig in a book of memorials to North American party members compiled by Stepan Darduni. When Zadig passed away in 1937, the outpouring of condolences from across the globe was huge. A statement from the Central Committee of the Armenian Revolutionary Federation of America noted on Zadig's passing, "Our organization is losing one of its most active, dedicated, and distinguished members."
Huh.
So I'm assuming you did not know any of
Did
this
not.
history.
No, you'd think that's that's the information that they would like to share with you know.
I can tell you he represented the party at a number of important meetings during those years, those fateful years. He served on the Central Committee of the United States, which was a very important Central Committee at that time and during that time period, which was instrumental. That Central Committee was was given the responsibility of Operation Nemesis. So Armengado, who was the first ambassador to the United States from Armenia, was the lead person, but other members of that operation were based here in the United States that worked on logistics and financing of that operation, and Zadig was an important part of that. One of the items also I've included in the material I've given you is a photograph of Zadig. That was in the last email I sent you. That photograph appears in the history of the party in the United States. There's a 2-volume history written by George Aghjayan, and in it is that photograph of Zadig. Again, indicative of how important he was to the party in those fateful years between the start of the genocide and the fall of the Republic and afterward.
I'm looking at the picture now, and it's I've never seen this picture. You think that this is one? Maybe they were just trying to prevent us from following that kind of route. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting because in your family, your grandmother was also president of the AGBU at one time. So, you know, both sides of the family were very influential in the community here. I don't know if that played a role or not. The internal turmoil in our community in the 30s may have played a role. His early death in 1937 may have played a role in this as well. But the story does not end there with Zadig. The village he was born in, Khatchkars, is one of those places where the families used the same surname throughout the 1800s and until today. There exist a number of Ottoman population registers for this village. One example is this one dated 1838. I have highlighted the family identified as Matos Keshish Oğlu, or Dur Matozyan, which is equivalent to Dur Matigyan. Matik being the diminutive form of Matos and Keshish being used for priest in this context. I have compiled the information from the Ottoman registers for the Dur Matikyan family of Khatchkars into a chart. Unfortunately, while we can be fairly confident that the father of Bagdasar, the grandfather of Zadig, is listed in this chart, we do not know for sure which one he would be. It is a bit frustrating to know we are just one link away from connecting you clearly to someone who lived in the 1700s. But you never know when that crucial piece of information will come to light. For now, you know that you are descended from the priest Matos who lived in the 1700s and that his descendants lived at least 100 years in the village of Khatchkars in Sepastia. If I were to speculate, I might focus on Zarug, son of Stepan. Stepan was named Matos after he was ordained a married priest. Could Zarug in the Ottoman records be Zadig, and thus would have the very common scenario of grandson being named for grandfather? While this is just conjecture, it is not unreasonable given the information we have. Zarug being born in 1825 and Bagdasar most likely being born between 1850 and 1860. So, what do you think about this information?
That's amazing. You never think that those records exist. and that you could dig that far back. That's one of the things that we talk about here, that you lose that kind of connection when you're growing up here. Everything seems to stop at your grandparents. You get some smattering of information from them about, Auntie Armin from wherever, and it's amazing. It's now, we were not hoping to feel like we wanted to go back, but it's now we might have to go back one more time to the Western Armenia.
Honestly, Ted, your family has a rich history, both in the stories about them and in the quantity and quality of records pertaining to them. It's one of those situations where information is available and possible, and you're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. I believe there's more that can be learned about this family, particularly the portion of the family that came from Bolis, Constantinople. Those records go back even further, and potentially you can find them. The most difficult thing about going further back is that they may have used different names. We just found one example of that, but that's the more common scenario. The scenario of the Dermatygians continually using that surname for over 100 years is more unusual than usual. But it's typical for this particular region of Sepastia. I found it over and over again in these Ottoman registers that has been the case in this area with your family as well as in others. Thank you so much, Ted, for allowing us to do this episode on your family. I think people learned a lot. I hope you found this useful in your own Armenian family history research, and if you have a question for a future episode, please send it to hyroots@haidenic.com.